And we're recording.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jen. I'm so excited to be seeing all of you today. It's such a great excuse to see everybody, even though it's virtual. And just to echo what Jen was saying earlier, I hope everybody is well and hope everyone is healthy and adjusting to our new reality. So I'm really excited to introduce Greg Crossman, who's the owner and physical therapist at Complete Game PT that's located in Lowell, and he'll speak a little bit about that in a few moments. Greg has been a great supporter of Soul Sisters and has also served as one of our sponsors the past 2 years for our Solstice 5K. So we're really excited to partner with him. Really a great opportunity as we sort of relish in this new reality of being virtual and adjusting and staying healthy and doing things for ourselves. So I thought this was a really great topic that you proposed, Greg. Definitely something very pertinent as we sort of navigate, work life and running solo and working out at home. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to you, and I'll just drive the slides that you have. So.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Jen, and wanted to thank all of you for having me tonight. Also hope that, everybody is safe and healthy, and families are all safe and healthy. And you can go ahead and click to the next slide. It's actually my thank you slide. So thank you. Also want to take a second to thank, all the doctors, nurses, support staff, first responders, all of you. I know a lot of the Soul Sisters are some of those medical people out there on the front lines, and just wanted to really recognize you for all that you're doing, and thank you. We really appreciate all that you do. You can go ahead to the next one. So just to give you a little bit about my background, professionally, I'm owner and physical therapist at Complete Game Physical Therapy. We're located in Lowell. I have about 20 years experience in outpatient orthopedics, working with athletes of all levels, even some Soul Sisters, as you can see from the picture there. I've worked with a few in the past. My personal background, I'm married with 2 kids, a 14 and a 12-year-old. I got to remember that. Their birthdays were last week. And a 2-year-old golden doodle as well. Typically we enjoy, playing with the dog and watching and coaching the kids in sports, but not so much the sports right now, but still a lot of playing with the dog and playing with the kids. As far as my running background goes, I'm a relative newbie to running. I got to admit, I hated running for a long time, and it was mostly because it hurt. It never really felt good. I was kind of forced into running when we got Murphy, our dog. I don't know if any of you are familiar with golden doodles, but they've got a lot of energy, and we had to figure out a way to get Murphy exercise, and it turned out to be running was the most efficient way to do so. So by default, I was out running the dog, and I kind of changed my approach to running, and I'm really enjoying it now. And I kind of wanted to share with you some of what I've been doing. You can go ahead and go ahead to the next slide. So my objectives tonight are just to establish with you what it means to be a running athlete. I wanted to review what effective strength training for runners looks like. Give you some specific exercises that you can do at home to improve your running performance and reduce the likelihood of injury. So I want to give you some stuff that you guys can start with right away that you can work on, and then end up going over some general considerations about how you can stay healthy running. Then we'll do a Q&A at the end as well. Go ahead, Kristen. So to define a running athlete, and I do believe that runners are athletes, by definition, an athlete is one who participates in competitive sports, which may be the case for some of you. It's certainly not for me as far as running goes. But also the second definition is a person who is trained or skilled in exercise, sports tactics, or games requiring physical strength, agility, and stamina. And running certainly requires physical strength. It does require agility to run properly, and certainly requires stamina. So I really do feel that runners are athletes. This quote by Eric Orton I think is nice too. Athleticism is awareness. And those of you who aren't familiar with Eric Gordon, he is a trainer. He wrote this book here, The Cool Impossible, which I highly recommend. He's a trainer based out of Jackson, Wyoming, and he actually trained Chris McDougall, who wrote Born to Run, which is another book I would highly recommend if you haven't read it. But Chris was a writer, a non-runner, and he trained Chris McDougall to run an ultramarathon, which he was able to do successfully. And Eric's got some really interesting approaches to running and kind of does it a little bit differently. And I've been using it personally, and I've been using it with my patients a lot with some really great outcomes. So a lot of what this presentation is based on is a lot to do with what Eric Gordon kind of teaches. You can go ahead, Kristen. So if we talk about running, we talk about the pillars of high performance. There's mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery are all aspects of running. Tonight, we're just going to talk about one of those aspects. We're just going to talk about movement, and we're really just going to talk about one segment of movement, which is strength. You can go ahead. Before we get into that, though, I did want to talk about pain. And movement and pain pain can really affect movement. Gray Cook, who's a very popular physical therapist, his quote was, "Pain changes everything," and it really does. What will happen is when you get pain, you're going to alter your movement patterns. And you're going to compensate around that pain. Compensations can go on for a while, but eventually they're going to lead to breakdown of body structures. Runners are some of the best compensators out there. And a lot of them believe that pain kind of goes hand in hand with running, but it really doesn't have to, and it really shouldn't. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about is by building this strength, you're going to help reduce that pain, get rid of that pain, and be able to run with better form and more efficiently. Go ahead, Kristen. So if we talk about strength, and with strength training, really the goal is to be robust enough to handle the technical and tactical training that you can complete without getting injured. So you want to be able to, really the goal with strengthening, especially with running, is just to be able to handle the training without getting injured. Again, an Eric Gordon quote on it is, "The ability to use stored up energy in our muscles to create power to propel and stabilize our movement as efficiently as possible." But with this, you got to make sure that you have equilibrium. And all equilibrium is really making sure that the big muscles are not overriding those stabilizers. So especially when we're talking with strength training and running, it's really working those stabilizers to be able to not be overcome by those bigger muscles. And that's a lot what we're going to talk about is the stabilizers strengthening. It doesn't look like the same kind of strengthening that you would typically think, like, you know, lifting weights to become a football player or a power lifter. We're talking about working some of those smaller stabilizing muscles. Go ahead, Kristen. Great. So what are those stabilizing muscles? Really, where we're going to work from is the ground up, okay? So the stabilizing muscles can be thought of as the foundation. And really what we talk a lot about is the foot. The foot is really going to be your foundation for running. The strengthening the feet is something that often gets overlooked, and it's something that we're going to talk a lot about. You know, as we move our way up the chain, we'll be talking about some of the other stabilizers too. Some of the smaller muscles in the hips and the core that really are important for running as well. So with this, form and awareness are key. Again, we go back to that idea of awareness. You've got to do these exercises with proper form, because if you don't, then those bigger muscles, again, are going to override the stabilizers, and you're not really going to get the full benefit of the exercises. You can go ahead, Kristen. Great, so our first exercise here is going to be a heel raise hold, okay? So the exercise should be done barefoot or at least no shoes on, and you're going to stand on one foot with your heel off the ground. You want to keep the knee straight and the hips level. Now you're going to think about using your big toe for stability. And you can use, I'm using poles here in this picture, but you can use poles or something else to balance on, but you want your grip to be relatively loose. So really what you're looking to do is work all those muscles, the small muscles in the bottom of the foot, that really provide, again, support for your body. A lot of times, shoes that we use, and, again, we could have a long discussion about shoes and footwear, but really a lot of times what shoes do and what arch supports and those sort of things do is they allow your feet to get lazy and they allow your feet to get weak. And these sort of exercises are going to help strengthen those feet and, again, allow stability all up the chain. So with this exercise, you'll feel it all the way up your leg. You may feel muscles in your hip, you may feel muscles in your core, but it really starts with working those muscles in the bottom of the foot. So that's the first exercise, is the heel raise hold. You can go ahead. And the next one is the single leg, is the heel raise with the side lift, okay? So we're gonna start off in that same position, up on your toe, stabilizing through that big toe, and then you're gonna lift the leg out to the side. So when you lift the leg out to the side, you wanna do a couple things. You wanna move slow and controlled. Again, really paying attention and awareness. You wanna keep the toes straight ahead, and you want to keep the hips level. Okay, so this starts to work some of the muscles in the outside of the hip too. So we're still working the foot, we're starting to work some of the muscles in the outside of the hip. Now, what do those muscles do? Those muscles really control the way your body's positioned, the way your hips are positioned when you're in single leg stance. So running is not just a single leg stance sport, it's a single leg impact sport. So every time you take a step, those muscles in the outside of the hip that you're standing on, they really have to be strong and they have to fire properly so that the pelvis doesn't drop. If the pelvis drops, then you're gonna have, again, more stress on the knee, more stress on the back, more stress on the hip itself. And again, you can compensate around it for a while, but eventually the body's gonna break down. So this exercise starts to work that. You wanna lift the leg slow and controlled out to the side, hold it for about 2 seconds, and then slowly coming back. You can go ahead to the next one. So the third exercise we're going over is similar to the second one, but this starts to really focus on a smaller muscle on the outside of that hip called the gluteus medius. The gluteus medius really, again, is another lateral hip stabilizer, but this one really focuses a little bit more stabilizing through the low back and through the hips again. So this one, same as the last, the setup is all exactly the same, but this time you're just gonna bend the knee to 90 degrees, lift the leg out, hold it for 2 seconds, and slow and controlled coming back in. Good, you can go to the next one. Next one's the glute bridge. This is one of my favorite exercises. I couldn't leave this one off. And it's a great exercise because you work a lot of muscles. You get a lot of bang for your buck from this exercise. You work your core, you work your hips, you work your legs. You hit a little bit of everything, and it's a great exercise for runners because runners especially tend to become what we call hamstring dominant. So every time you push off when you run, you're extending through your hip. There's 2 different muscles that can extend through the hip. There's your hamstring or your glute. So your glute is going to be a much stronger, more powerful muscle and much better built for that hip extension. The hamstring is the backup hip extensor. And what happens to us a lot of times if we sit for a lot of the day, or just through developing bad movement patterns, we become hamstring dominant. So this is a great exercise to start to work that a little bit. So you're just going to lay on your back with your knees bent, your feet flat. You want to tighten your glutes and tighten your core. And you're going to lift your hips straight up to the ceiling. And what you're looking to do is get a straight line from your shoulder to your knee. We always tell our patients is to really focus on your glutes here. So you want to feel about 70% glute, 30% either hamstring or low back. And again, it shouldn't be pain in the hamstring, low back. It should just feel like the muscles are kicking in a little bit, but you want to feel that primarily in the glute. I will say a regression for this exercise, which I didn't write down here, but a good regression, sometimes people will start this exercise and all they're doing, they're just getting their hamstrings keep spazzing on them. They almost to the point where they get hamstring cramps. I'll say if that's happening with you, just lay flat on the floor with your hands under your butt and just work on just squeezing your glutes, pushing down on your hands, squeezing your glutes into your hands without tightening your hamstrings. That's a great place to start if you can't even get up into that bridge, which does happen quite a bit. Then you can progress to the regular bridge. And then once that becomes easy, if you raise your arms straight up to the ceiling, it'll reduce some stability, make it a little more challenging. One leg out straight. Again, you reduce some of the stability, make that a little more challenging on that glute. but a really great exercise to work on, again, all those stabilizing muscles. Go ahead, Kristen. This is the last one I'm going to leave you with today as far as the exercises go. And it's a bottom-up lunge. And most are familiar with the lunge exercise. And this one, we're just going to work from the ground up. So you're going to start off kneeling on one knee. You want the front foot, you want both knees bent about 90 degrees. So the front leg, the knee should be right over the ankle. The back leg, the knee should be right under the hip, okay? And for this exercise, you're gonna first tighten your core and tighten your glutes. So what you'll feel is that little arch in your low back should kind of flatten. When you do that, you're gonna feel a stretch on the front of the hip of the knee that you're kneeling on. So the leg that you're kneeling on, you start to feel a little bit of stretch in the front of that hip. From there, once you get that, you're going to push through the front heel so that you come up into the split stance sort of position. This exercise is really great for running because it starts to get you into that kind of reciprocal motion, that one leg in front of the other motion. You start to train yourself that way. From this top position, just slowly lower back down. And then make sure with this one, you're not getting pain, okay? We really want to watch out for pain, especially in the knees. If you have a history of knee injuries or any arthritis in the kneecap area, this one can be bothersome. Watch out for that. Again, we don't want pain. You can go ahead, Kristen. So as far as these exercises go, some general considerations. They should all be done in a slow manner. Again, awareness is key. Never want any pain with any of the exercises. It's not a no pain, no gain sort of situation. We want to, again, make sure that we're doing them properly and there's no pain. You can do them 3 to 5 times a week. That should be minimum, but because you're working stabilizing muscles, again, you can do these daily. They're not like working the big muscles to go to the gym. You know, you shouldn't go to the gym and work the same muscle over every day, but these are working the smaller stabilizers, so you can do these daily. High repetitions, especially for runners. If you think about how many times those muscles have to fire when you go out for a run, you know, simply doing 3 sets of 10 with these is probably not going to be enough to build the endurance that you need. So, you know, 2 to 3 sets of 20 to 25 repetitions, or even more than that if it feels okay. For the heel raise hold and the bridge, I like doing isometric holds with those. So you can hold those up to about 2 minutes, which is fine. You should feel those pretty good. And these exercises are great for pre-run. But I will say when we're using them before we run, we're just looking to get activation. So you want to get those muscles firing, get some blood flow to the muscles. Again, build some awareness in your body and how those muscles work. So just do 1 set. Don't do to the point where you fatigue the muscles out. And with the holds, really just look at doing like 1-minute holds with those exercises, or kind of whatever feels good to you. Again, enough to kind of get some blood flow in the muscles, get them working a little bit, but not enough that you fatigue everything out right before you go for a run. You can go ahead to the next slide. So stretching, I had to put a stretching slide in here because I always get asked about stretching. And my view on stretching is not bad, but oftentimes you're treating a symptom and you're not really treating the problem. What happens is in any joint in your body, if you're weak in the stabilizing muscles around that joint, the body will recognize that the joint's not stable, and it will tighten up muscles, usually the bigger muscles around that joint, to help protect it. It's just the body's way of protecting itself. So what happens a lot is we'll have people come into the clinic and they'll say, you know, I stretch my hamstrings, I stretch them and stretch them and stretch them, and nothing is working. They're always tight. I can't get them loose. Sometimes, though it's counterintuitive, you don't need to stretch that. You actually need to strengthen it. You need to strengthen those stabilizers around there so that the hamstrings can actually relax. So that's kind of my view on stretching. There are situations where muscles are shortened, especially sometimes now where we may be sitting a little bit more than usual. Muscles can get tighter and get shortened. In that situation, it's great to stretch and you know, stretch and loosen those muscles up. But there are times too where the muscles are going to be tight, and if stretching them out, you know, a little bit doesn't seem like it loosens them up, you may have a situation where you really actually need to strengthen more than you need to stretch. That's good.
Awesome. Thank you
Yep.
so much, Greg. This
I got a
is
couple
so
more slides.
helpful.
I got a couple more
Oh,
slides,
okay.
actually. Yeah, there's more. Couple more. So some other components on healthy running, form, technique, and programming. Those are all important aspects. We talked about the stabilizers, but we didn't really hit a full strength training program. And then, of course, there's nutrition and mindset are really important, which, again, you could have a full webinar on each of these topics easily, and probably multiple aspects of these topics. But there's certainly, I want just to recognize that there are other components to a healthy running program as well. Got the puppy?
Yeah, it came a little early.
So kind of talking
on.
a little bit more about those other aspects. Having a team behind you is really important and really helpful. And that team may look different depending on the level of running that you are, but you kind of want to take care of the performance side, and that's where a coach can really be helpful. So having a running coach, if the higher level runner and you want to go out and hire a running coach, that may be great for you. Someone who can really look at form and really work with you on form and programming and that sort of thing. Or it may be a situation where you just, do a couple weekend workshops to work on form a little bit. Or even just having a good running partner. I mean, you guys have some great people to run with in the club. And I think you may have a couple coaches available in the club too. But just having a running partner who will take a look at your form and give you a few cues on it. Again, there's a right way and a wrong way to run, and you can do everything right. And if you're not running the right way, you're probably going to end up being injured. So really taking care of that is important. The fitness aspect, we talked a little bit about exercising those stabilizers, but exercising the bigger muscles is important too. So it may be a trainer that you work with, which is great, but just make sure if you're working with a trainer, you're working with a trainer who works with runners and is well attuned to working with runners. You don't want to go into the gym and have them give you a powerlifting workout. That's not really going to be helpful for what you want to do and what you want to excel at. And then there's the medical aspect of it too. And if you have pain, again, I strongly encourage you taking a look at getting some sort of medical provider to help you out. Again, just like the trainers, make sure though that you have somebody who's used to working with runners and who works with runners regularly. And then in an ideal world, you've got these three kind of components all talking to each other. So you got the coach talking to the fitness trainer, you got the fitness trainer talking to the medical talking back to the coach, and everybody's working together to make sure that you're getting exactly what you need. Go ahead, Kristen. And so just to let you guys know, right now we're offering free assessments to the Soul Sisters Running Club. So if anybody is interested in getting, a 15-minute video assessment, if you have specific questions, again, having something that's a little more individualized is always good. These exercises that I gave you are good, but getting something that's a little more individualized is good. If you've got some aches and pains that have been bothering you, sit down with one of our PTs. You can shoot me an email, gcrossman@completegamept.com. We'll find a time that works for you, and we can just set up a quick assessment and maybe give you a few things to work on. And then I think there's one more. I think we got one more. Those are the references. Those are some of the books that I referenced earlier. And then I think my last page, I got to show you my running partner. There he is. That's Murphy, my running partner. That was probably a year ago, but so I just want to open up now to questions.
Very cute. Sure. There is, Jen, I don't know if we wanted to do this just to make it a little bit more organized. There's a chat function. If you go on to the upper right hand side of the toolbar and you hit on chat, if anybody wants to ask a question of Greg, just wants to list, like just type in Q and then we can go through the list. And I think Jen is gonna unmute everyone's line.
No, I'll unmute when we go down. You can, or I can unmute along the lines. You can also raise your hand as well. I don't know if I want to unmute and try it. Sorry about that. That did not work out well. So if you do want to ask a question, it looks like
We
Marley.
can probably all unmute ourselves individually to ask a question, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say. If you want to ask a question, go ahead and unmute yourself. Absolutely.
Greg, I actually had a question. This is great, by the way, really helpful. How often would you recommend, from somebody that doesn't, maybe not incorporating any strength training currently, what would you recommend to start off with? Like, how many days a week would you incorporate some of these strengthening exercise?
So I would do, again, I'd do a minimum kind of full workout 3 days a week. And kind of, again, depends a little bit on, you know, what your running looks like too. But I would also try to use them a little bit again as activation before you go for a run. So if you're doing some sort of stretching or some sort of little routine before you run, I'd try to incorporate some of those into your routine there. And even trying to incorporate, these are great exercises to kind of do if you can try to incorporate them a little bit throughout the day. You know, you're doing dishes, slide the shoes off and just kind of get on the toes and work the feet a little bit, or, you know, do some of the side leg kicks or those sort of things. Again, they're working the stabilizing muscles. So, you know, doing a little bit throughout the day goes a long way, because you do want to build, endurance in those muscles as well as strength. So, you know, I'd say full workout 3 days a week would be great. And then just trying to kind of piece the other parts in throughout your day is going to be even better.
Awesome. We have a few questions coming up through chat. Megan is asking, can you recommend the best IT band exercise?
Yes. So the IT band, this is obviously a very popular one with runners. So those two exercises that I gave you, kicking the leg out to the side, those, so I don't want to get too in depth here, but the IT band is a band of tissue that runs along the outside of that leg, okay? And it's actually the only tissue in the body that's not fully, it's got more contractile properties than a tendon, but not as many as a muscle. So it's not a muscle, it's not a tendon, it's just this band of tissue. But what happens is, particularly if those lateral hip muscles get weak, the body will try to grab onto whatever it can. Like I was talking about before with the every time your foot hits the ground, your pelvis has to stabilize. Otherwise, you're going to tip off to the side, right? So if those muscles, the gluteus medius and those other muscles aren't strong enough, the body will grab onto the IT band and try to use the IT band to help keep it from tilting. So typically, again, this is one of those where the IT band feels tight. I feel like I need to stretch it. I feel like I need to roll it, which will feel good temporarily. But until you strengthen those muscles on the outside of the hip, it's not going to get better. It's going to kind of keep happening over and over. You're kind of treating a symptom. So, you know, doing rolling forward is fine. You know, you can do like the cross the leg behind sort of stretch. That's kind of the popular stretch for the IT band. But the big thing with that one in particular is actually one that all the time we find, I would say 99% of the time, people with IT band problems, those muscles in the outside of the hip and the glutes are weak. So I would really get into using those, especially those three ones, the glute bridge and the two side leg kicks out to the side, the frog kick and the side leg kick. Great exercises for IT band. Cool.
Another question. I am a huge band user. What do you recommend for exercises with bands?
I love bands too. They're just going to add more of a strengthening component to it. So again, you can use these same sort of exercises that I gave here and just add a band to it. So if you add a band loop around the knees for the bridge, that gets a little more activation in those muscles on the outside of the hip. if you add a band and you do the side leg kick, that's just going to add some resistance to it. Don't forget about what your goal is with the exercise though, and make sure that adding the band, you may feel a little more of a muscle burn, but make sure you're feeling the muscle burn in the right place. So a lot of times we'll add resistance to stuff before we're really ready for it, because we want to get to that burn quicker. But that might not be, again, if you're, so just for example, if you add the band to that side leg lift and you start feeling it in the front of your hip flexor is trying to compensate again for that weak muscle, that weak lateral hip muscle, and you're going to actually cause more trouble than it's worth. So again, they're a great way to advance some of these exercises. The ones that I showed you, or the sidestepping with the band, those kind of exercises, all really good to do. Just make sure that using that resistance, you're feeling it where you should be feeling it.
Great. We have a question from Kim. She says, I see a lot of runners avoiding plyo and notice you didn't recommend any here. Is this something you recommend avoiding?
Not necessarily. Plyometrics, I'm assuming you're just talking about jumping sort of exercises. No, it depends on what you're trying to get out of the exercise. Running in and of itself, there's a lot of impact to it. So it's not a sport where you really need to do a ton of plyometric training added on to what you're already doing. But it can be useful. It's a great power sort of training modality, training tool. So I wouldn't say that I'm against it, especially if you're trying to increase your power. But you really need to have that baseline of that foundation of strength built up before you go into a plyo. So if I try to jump into a plyo, pardon the pun, but I try to jump into a plyo and I haven't really taken care of the muscles on the outside of my hip or taken care of the muscles on the bottom of my feet, and my knees are caving in, and I'm leaving myself at risk for an injury doing the plyo, and I'm also really not gaining much out of that exercise. So I think they can be useful as long as you've kind of taken care of that foundation first.
Any other questions that anyone has? I don't know if Marley is still muted, but she left a comment. Thanks, Greg. Had a great experience with him. Murphy rocks.
Everybody comes into the clinic to see Murphy. They get mad when he's not there. Thank you, Marley.
You're welcome. I love him.
He misses you too. I'm
That's
good.
my
How are
dog.
you?
I'm good. I'm much better. Finally feeling great, and I meant it what I said. You were great, and I'm actually finally running under 9-minute pace again, and even under 8. So
Nice.
thank you very much.
That's awesome. Keep it up.
I'm trying.
We have a question from Stephanie. Would clamshells be a good exercise as well?
Yep, they're great exercise. So again, clamshells, very similar to that frog lift that I was talking about. You're just going to do it laying on your side. So it's almost a little bit of a regression. If you're having trouble doing that heel raise frog kick, a clamshell is going to target that same muscle, that gluteus medius muscle. May be a better way to do it initially if you're having trouble keeping your hips level or you're unable to really tolerate the standing exercise. Clams are a great way to do it. Just make sure, again, when you're doing clams, you're feeling it in the back of the hip, kind of near your butt. You don't want to feel the clams in the front of the hip or even kind of down that IT band. You really want to focus it more towards that posterior hip.
Okay, Beth I've just started increasing my miles and noticed that one knee is making noise, clicking, etc., but no pain. Any thoughts?
That's a tricky one. Sometimes that happens and it's not anything to be too alarmed about. You know, obviously if it hurts, you want to back off. You know, I would be careful with that though, because if, you know, it can progress, and it certainly can progress to the point where you start to feel it and it starts to be painful. Again, a lot of times what that is the kneecap, the underside of the kneecap, usually where you'll get the clicking or the grinding is right around that kneecap area. And the underside of the kneecap's not flat. There's a little ridge in the underside of the kneecap, and it rides in a groove created by the end of your femur. And when everything is kind of lined up and in good alignment, that ridge rides right in the groove, and you don't have any problems. If you get an imbalance in strength and flexibility in that leg, or weakness up in the hip, again, goes back to that lateral hip that we talk a lot about, or it can come down from the foot too. If that foot is collapsing and the muscles in the foot are weak, it can cause that ridge to ride kind of to the side of the groove, and you can get a little bit of crunching and problem with that. So again, I'd take kind of a look at your alignment and maybe try some of these exercises. These exercises are actually really good for that sort of thing. Nothing where you need to shut down, you know, once you hear a little cracking or popping, but I would get on doing some exercises to try to mitigate that as much as you can.
Beth, I don't know if you're still muted. Are you there? She wrote back, that sounds exactly right. It's my weak side. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. And that's actually a great point. So with these exercises, again, it goes back to awareness. Really make sure you're taking the time to see how you feel with it. And if you notice one side's weaker than the other, do some extra sets on that side that's weak. You really, again, you want balance as much as possible with these. So that's a great point actually too. You know, doing the 2 to 3 sets is perfect, but if you notice you're weaker on one side, go ahead and hit that side with an extra set or two, just to try to balance yourself out.
Any other questions before we let Greg go? Another comment from Melissa. Thank you so much for reiterating what I already know I should be doing. No better time than now. I would agree with that for me as well.
Yeah, and again, if you guys want, I can reach out to me. I can give you a printout of these exercises too, if that would be helpful. I don't have anything prepared right now, but you know, if anybody's interested, I can give you a printout with kind of descriptions and stuff of the exercises as well.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, anyone else? Last call for Greg. This was so helpful.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Greg, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank everybody for calling. It was so nice to see so many faces. I feel like it's been forever. So thank you again to Greg. Thank you for Jen for coordinating the call. Thanks, everybody. Hope to see everyone soon.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.